Hello and welcome back to the caves, everybody. Today we are going to be going over builds done quick for Stubby. This is Engineer's second primary weapon, and a pretty fun little submachine gun. In this video we're going to be going over all the overclocks for Stubby, as well as builds that I'd recommend for them, and a secondary weapon in this case that I would recommend, even though a lot of people argue that Engie's secondaries are basically their primaries, which, that's kind of fair. But before we do that, let's go over some pros and cons to Stubby. The pros of Stubby is that it actually holds a lot of bullets. For Engineer's primaries, Engie tends to run out of bullets really fast compared to other classes, at least compared to Gunner and Driller. So having a lot of bullets can be useful. It also has an innate chance of electrocuting enemies, which can be really good. And it has some pretty solid mods, as well as its overclocks are actually pretty solid too. Downsides to Stubby, though, are that it doesn't really do that much damage per shot. It can take a little while to kill things quickly, and it doesn't have a huge magazine, at least base Stubby doesn't. You can modify it to where it can have a pretty big magazine, so that one can be kind of taken care of. Let's go over its overclocks. The very first one that we're going to be talking about is Welloiled Machine. This is a clean overclock, and this is a super simple and a very good overclock. This increases your rate of fire, and it increases your reload speed. Stubby already has a pretty fast reload, so increasing that is pretty nice, and it also has a pretty decent rate of fire, so increasing that is also pretty good. The way I have Stubby built is like this, at least with this overclock. It is very easy to just go with a straight 2 build for Stubby, and that honestly works really well with any of its overclocks. So if you want to have that, and that build will be showing up pretty soon, that is a really good option. In Tier 1, I usually go with the increased electricity chance. This gives us 25% more chance to trigger the electricity status, which is really good. That deals damage over time and slows down enemies. The other two options are pretty decent here though too. Damage is nice if you just want to kill things a little bit quicker with regular bullets, although the electricity will still usually outdamage this. And then the extra ammo is also pretty good, even though Stubby holds a decent amount of shots. You can always have it hold more. In Tier 2, any of these are really good. Pick whichever one you would like. I'm going with the larger mag size here, so we go up to 40 rounds in Stubby. But the recoil reduction in Tier 2 is really good, to where Stubby has basically no recoil then. And the other increased rate of fire in Tier 2 is also really good if you want to have more DPS and a faster rate of fire overall. In Tier 3, I'm going with extra ammo here. Most of our damage is going to be coming from the electricity with Stubby, at least most of the time if we're building it for electricity. So damage doesn't really make sense to take here, but it isn't a bad option. It's just ammo is a little bit more consistent. In Tier 4, we're going with conductive bullets. When enemies are affected by electricity, we're doing more damage to them. If we can trigger electricity pretty often, makes it so we get a little bit more damage here. Although the hollow point rounds are pretty good too if you find yourself hitting weak spots really often. Both are good. And then in Tier 5, we're going with the electricity arc. This makes it so that whenever electricity does trigger on enemy, it has a chance to basically explode out to other enemies and affect them. That can be really good for crowd control because that just makes it so we're using up less ammo. You could go with the larger magazine size here though if you would like that too. I decided to pair this with another clean overclock with lightweight cases for the breach cutter. This is, I would say, arguably the breach cutter's strongest overclock, or one of them, where you just get more ammo for it. And then you're just going to be using the breach cutter for close and medium ranged enemies, and especially against big enemies. Breach cutter can also shoot through walls, which is nice. And then you're just going to spray down everything else with Stubby. So going to the next overclock, we have EM Refire Booster. This is a balanced overclock for Stubby, which I consider one of my favorites for it, probably my favorite overclock for it. And it's a very simple overclock. You get an even higher rate of fire than what Welloiled Machine gave you, and you also get +2 electricity damage on top of this, which is just guaranteed with every shot, which is really good. So you get more damage per bullet. But all this comes at the cost of Stubby having more spread, so it's not quite as accurate at longer ranges. If you only find yourself using Stubby at close and medium range though, you're probably not going to notice this. The way I have it built is the straight 2 build, so let's go through that. In Tier 1, we're going with a higher electricity chance. Even though our bullets have electricity, this can still be really good for proccing the electricity status on enemies, so that's why I run it. If you don't want that though, you could go with more ammo or more damage. Both are pretty good with this one. In Tier 2, the recoil reduction, that makes it just really simple to hold this on target, and it's not jumping around too much. The bullets aren't spreading too much unless you're using this at really long range. But honestly, the other two options in Tier 2 are pretty good too. Tier 3, I'm going with extra ammo, just so we don't run through ammo so quickly. And then Tier 4 and 5, we have the AoE electricity. This is a very straightforward Stubby build, but it's probably one of my favorites. It has actually pretty good time to kill on any enemy. It shoots really fast, it does a lot of damage, doesn't have the longest range that Stubby can have, but that usually doesn't matter. And it pairs really well with any sort of secondary you want to take with it. I decided to pair this with one of my favorites, with hyper propellant for the grenade launcher. This one just turns your grenade launcher into a railgun, and you can snipe enemies from across the map. It does massive damage to anything that you hit with it, and it is just really satisfying to use. It is only good for single targets though, so you're going to be using Stubby for crowds. Hyper propellant really doesn't have any AoE to it, no matter how you want to build it. For our third overclock, we have an unstable one. This is turret EM Discharge. This one is a bit of an interesting one. This one nerfs your damage and nerfs your magazine capacity. However, now you can trigger the EM Discharge on your turrets. What this does is whenever you fire at your turrets, there is a chance, based on your electricity chance, to trigger this, dealing damage to everything in the area, slowing everything down, and it has this really big purple lightning effect to it, which is really cool, or magenta lightning effect. It's really nice, and this actually does a lot of damage to enemies. It's really easy to friendly fire with this, but it doesn't do that much friendly fire damage, and I'm not entirely sure why it doesn't, because it kills the bugs really well. Maybe it's because a lot of the damage is lingering, and that doesn't count when it hits friendlies. In order to trigger this, the turret does need to be fully built, so you can use this with 1 or 2 turrets. Usually I like taking this with 2 turrets because you can set them up far enough apart that they kind of overlap, and the actual explosion radius is bigger than what the effect radius really looks like. So this is probably Stubby's most ammo efficient build, and probably one of Engineer's just most ammo efficient build, or I guess overclocks. The build I like running with it is like this. In tier 1, I would highly recommend that you take the electricity chance. Since this is what is going to be triggering your overclock, you probably want to have that on there just so that you can trigger it more often. Tier 2, I like going to the larger mag size just so that we go back up to 35 rounds. The 25 round magazine I just don't really like that much, but if you find it fine, then take recoil reduction or the increased rate of fire. Both are good. In tier 3, I like going with extra ammo just so that we can use this a little bit more, but if you wanted to throw damage on this, you could. In tiers 4 and 5, we're also just going with more electricity effects. This one really makes sense with this one because you're likely going to be getting a lot of your damage from the actual burst from the turret electrocuting stuff, and this once upon a time was even stronger than this, because you used to be able to put this on turrets that were just the node. So you just placed down the node and could shoot it there and it would zap. Now that has been fixed. That was a bug to where you do have to build up your turret entirely in order for you to shoot it. It's still a really strong overclock though, because you're also still going to have the turret be shooting whatever is coming at you. So that can also help, especially if you have like stun on the turret. And this one actually pairs really well with any sort of primary weapon that you would like. I decided to pair it with the Shard Diffractor with the Volatile Impact Reactor. This one is the Magma Laser. This one you can just spray on the ground, lights enemies on fire, which can be really useful. You can also take the slow with it if you would like and slow down enemies. Just a very strong crowd control build and pretty good against big single targets too. For our next overclock, we have Turret Arc. This is the other unstable overclock for Stubby, and this one also revolves around your turrets. So what Turret Arc does is once you've built your turret, you can then shoot your turret, and this has a chance of triggering based on your electricity chance of zapping that turret and making it essentially an AoE damaging pylon, I guess would be a good way of saying it. So any enemies walking near it or friendlies walking near it will take electricity damage and will be slowed down. You can then connect this to another turret or multiple turrets, because any of your turret perks for any weapon on Ingi work for every Engineer's turret. You can connect this to another turret so long as it's within 15 meters of one another, and then you can create a chain. This basically becomes an electric fence. Any enemy walking through this takes damage over time from the electricity triggering, as well as it slows them down, and they take a little bit of lingering electricity once they move out of it. This can be really, really strong. You actually don't even need 2 turrets for this to be pretty good, because you can just set this in a choke point and then shoot it, and then enemies have to walk by it. The turret is shooting them, and they're getting zapped by it. It can be pretty useful, as well as this technically does have a 2-meter radius all the way around it, so it is bigger than what it actually looks like. The way I like building Turret Arc is like this. So in Tier 1, again, I would highly recommend that you take the electricity chance. That one does make a difference. That way you can just trigger this more often and more reliably, because other times when I haven't taken this, I have to shoot my turret like sometimes up to like 8 times before it actually triggers. In Tier 2, I'm going to the faster rate of fire. This is to make up for the lack of rate of fire that this one gives, but any of them in Tier 2 are pretty good. Take whichever you'd like. Tier 3, more ammo, so I don't run through ammo. Tier 4 and 5, more electricity, because we're already stacking electricity. And this one can pair pretty well with most secondary overclocks. I decided to pair it with Inferno on the Breach Cutter, another really strong overclock for the Breach Cutter, and it just makes it so you can light things on fire. So you can slow things down with the electricity and then fire this through and deal even more damage, especially if it's big enemies. For our next overclock, we have Lightweight Rounds. This is a balanced overclock that nerfs your damage and nerfs your rate of fire, but gives you a lot more ammo for Stubby. This one is very straightforward out of the overclocks, and it can be pretty decent, especially if you want to pair it with a secondary weapon that has a lot of single target damage or a lot of AoE damage and doesn't have very much ammo, which is what we're going to be doing. The way I like to build lightweight rounds is like this. So in Tier 1, I'm taking extra ammo. This is just so that we can stack even more ammo. This will make sense with the overclock that we're taking. In Tier 2, faster rate of fire, so we can make up for that rate of fire. This can just be really useful so that we can kill things a little bit quicker, because with the nerf in damage and the nerf in rate of fire, it does make it so Stubby isn't killing things really quick. In tier 3, I'm taking extra ammo once again. This is just to stack all the ammo on this. We have about 900 rounds with Stubby this way, which is very funny. You just don't run out of ammo very quickly with this at all. In tier 4, I'm going with weak spot damage because we're not really going with electricity on this, although you absolutely could if you would like, but this is just more to stack for ammo and to kill things steadily over time. And then in tier 5, I'm going with the larger magazine size. That way we have a 50 round magazine with this. And this is actually really funny. You could make this all the way up to 60 round magazine and just have a slower rate of fire, and that way you would have 900 rounds in total, which is pretty fun. The reason why I'm doing all this is because I'm pairing it with Fatboy, which is an unstable overclock for the grenade launcher, which allows you to fire nukes out of this. Now, no matter how you build Fatboy, you're not going to have very many nukes. Nukes do okay against big single targets, but they do best against crowds. So when you see a large crowd, just fire a nuke in there, and for the rest of the time, we're just going to have Stubby out, which takes forever to run out of bullets. So it actually makes this loadout go a lot longer than it otherwise would. And then for our final overclock, we have the super slim rounds. This one is a clean overclock that just makes it so you have a larger magazine size, and you also have reduced space spread. That's pretty good. It is a clean overclock, so you can kind of build it however you'd like. I built it like this. So in tier 1, electricity chance, tier 2, rate of fire, tier 3, ammo, and then tiers 4 and 5, even more electricity. This can be built really in any way that you like building Stubby though. It's just a bonus to the weapon, and it's a pretty good bonus overall. You can also take whatever you'd like as a secondary weapon with this one. I don't really have much to say because this one's a pretty straightforward overclock. I decided to pair it with the shard diffractor and take it with efficiency tweaks, which is another clean overclock that's just very strong. This particular build actually has a lot of sustained fire with the shard diffractor and with Stubby. I tended to use Stubby for close and medium range enemies, or even at longer range because we do have better accuracy, so it's not even bad there. And then efficiency tweaks for the longer and mid-range enemies that I can just kind of hold the laser on until they're dead. And this was all the overclocks for Stubby. Stubby has some pretty solid overclocks and some pretty solid mods. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Tell me what your thoughts are on Stubby's overclocks down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.